How did Steve Rogers grow young again after Avengers Endgame erased his future? And what if the answer was hidden in the past we thought we already understood? Welcome back to MovieCast. This is Liam Harrison. And today we're stepping into a Marvel mystery that changes everything we thought we knew about time, legacy, and Captain America himself. Endgame closed Steve Rogers' journey with quiet finality. An old man on a bench handing the shield to Sam Wilson, his mission complete. But Marvel never shows us something without purpose. That lingering look, that untold past with Peggy Carter wasn't just emotional closure, it was a loaded gun waiting to fire. Doomsday finally pulls the trigger by showing us a young Steve Rogers again, straight out of the 1940s, the same Steve who chose love over duty and stayed behind in the past. This isn't resurrection, and it's not lazy nostalgia. It's a carefully layered consequence of Endgame's time travel rules. What we're seeing isn't the Steve who returned the stones and aged into the man on the bench. We're seeing the Steve who never came back. The one who stayed. The one who lived an entire unseen life. And that single decision may have quietly rewritten the fate of the multiverse. To understand how young Steve exists again, we have to accept something Endgame never said out loud, but carefully implied. Two Steve Rogers can exist without breaking time. When Steve went back to return the stones, the Ancient One warned about branching realities. The moment Steve chose to stay with Peggy, he created one. In the main MCU timeline, Steve returned as an old man because his mission required him to come back and pass the shield forward. But in a branched timeline, another Steve remained frozen in the 1940s, married Peggy, and lived through history as a silent guardian. Marvel cleverly avoided showing us what he did during those decades, but Avengers Doomsday finally opens that door. The Steve we see young again isn't de-aged. He never aged into the modern era at all. He lived naturally through time. And here's the twist. This Steve didn't become Captain America the world remembered. He stayed in the shadows. No Avengers. No public heroics. Just a soldier who knew the future and chose restraint. That restraint over decades may have created a timeline more stable than the main one. And stability is exactly what the multiverse is now desperate for. The Doomsday trailer adds another shocking layer. Steve has a child. This single detail changes everything. A child means legacy, and in Marvel, legacy equals power. Steve Rogers' DNA enhanced by the super soldier serum doesn't just fade away. It evolves. His child wouldn't necessarily be another Captain America, but someone carrying a perfected version of Erskine's dream. Unlike Steve, this child would grow up in a world at peace, with parents, with guidance, not forged by war, but protected from it. That matters because Marvel has always shown that trauma shapes heroes as much as power does. This child represents something new, a super soldier without scars. But here's where the theory deepens. This child grows up in a timeline where Steve knows every future threat. Hydra, shields fall, alien invasions. Steve could subtly prevent disasters without ever becoming a symbol. That means this branch timeline becomes dangerously too perfect. And in Marvel logic, perfection attracts attention. Cosmic attention. The TVA doesn't prune chaos, it prunes deviation. A timeline that avoids every catastrophe might be more threatening than one that survives them. Now consider why Avengers Doomsday brings this Steve into focus. The multiverse is collapsing, not because of villains alone, but because of imbalance. Too many realities, too many outcomes. And one timeline, Steve's hidden life timeline, may be acting as an anchor. A reality where free will didn't spiral into destruction. When incursions begin, the universe doesn't look to the loudest heroes. It looks to the most stable point. That's why this Steve is pulled into the conflict. Not as Captain America, but as the man who made the hardest choice and lived with it. He didn't save the world with a shield. He saved it by stepping aside. And now the multiverse needs that version of leadership. The young Steve we see isn't confused or displaced. He's ready. Because he's been waiting decades, watching timelines fracture, knowing one day the cost of staying hidden would come due. Doomsday isn't his return. It's his reckoning. The existence of two Steves also reframes Sam Wilson's role. Old Steve giving Sam the shield wasn't retirement, it was delegation. The main timeline needed a Captain America who could inspire in chaos. Sam represents hope born from struggle. But the other timeline didn't need a symbol, it needed a foundation. That's why Steve never revealed himself there. Two worlds, two needs, two Captain Americas fulfilling different philosophies of heroism. Avengers Doomsday isn't undoing Sam's legacy by bringing Steve back. It's contrasting them. Sam fights the visible war. Steve fights the invisible one. And when the multiverse collapses, these philosophies clash. Sam believes in confronting threats head-on. Steve believes some futures must be quietly redirected. Neither is wrong. That ideological conflict may be the emotional core of Doomsday. Not hero versus villain, but legacy versus consequence. The shield was never just a weapon. It was a promise. And now that promise exists in two forms. There's also the darker implication Marvel is hinting at. What if Steve's perfect timeline is the problem? By preventing suffering, he may have prevented growth. Marvel villains often rise because pain shapes power. Without adversity, civilizations stagnate. Steve's child growing up without war may carry power without perspective. That's dangerous. Not evil, but untested. And when cosmic forces like Kang or Dr. Doom observe this timeline, they don't see peace. They see potential. A universe that could be molded. That's why it becomes ground zero for Doomsday. Steve is forced to confront the possibility that his choice to stay, to build a life, may have endangered more lives than the battles he walked away from. This is the ultimate Captain America dilemma, personal happiness versus global responsibility. Endgame made us believe he earned his rest. Doomsday asks whether rest was ever an option. As the film progresses, the young Steve isn't trying to reclaim the shield or his title. He's trying to protect his family. That's what makes him vulnerable. Every other version of Steve had nothing to lose but himself. This one has a child. A legacy that extends beyond ideals. And Marvel has always been cruelest to heroes when they finally find something worth living for. The multiverse war forces Steve to step back into the role he abandoned, knowing it could erase the life he built. This mirrors Endgame's final decision in reverse. Back then, he chose love over duty. Now duty demands love as collateral. That emotional symmetry is not accidental. Marvel is closing Steve Rogers' story not with glory, but with consequence. The past he saved is now demanding payment. The climax of the theory is simple, but devastating. The old Steve on the bench and the young Steve in Doomsday are the same man at different points of accountability. One finished his story by passing the shield. The other must finish it by deciding whether his timeline deserves to survive. Doomsday may end with Steve making the ultimate sacrifice, not his life, but his reality, choosing to let his perfect world collapse to save the multiverse. That would explain why this timeline was never mentioned before. It doesn't survive. And his child, his legacy, becomes a symbol not of what could be, but what was willingly given up. Captain America doesn't die in battle. He dies in choice. And that's why Steve Rogers is young again. Not because Marvel wanted nostalgia, but because unfinished choices don't age. They wait. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Avengers Doomsday, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to MovieCast for more cinematic breakdowns. I'm Liam Harrison, and I'll see you in the next one.